a gathering of all sorts of different people, mostly human, but there are smatterings of half-orcs, gnomes, and half-elves around the room, with a couple of misplaced drow. They're gathered around a new person to the tavern, another adventurer spinning tales amongst those who would come to listen. Some are amused, some are curious, while others are only really listening in order to call the speaker on what simply couldn't have happened. But this is hardly some random person passing through. The name of this one is well known, his face alongside a few others recognizable in countless bars from countless times of repeating tales that were either seen or heard about throughout taverns, bars, and inns all across the entirety of Faerun. Part of a group of interesting people with many good deeds at their backs, though maybe some that people don't exactly find all that fond. Part of an old group of heroes. It's been a couple years since then, but the tales of them are woven primarily by this one particular fellow. Out of interest or out of desire for a story between drinks and food, the tavern has grown quiet in lieu of a recognized face beginning to weave his tales once more in a new place.
And so, that's how we killed a horde of zombies. Don't ask me to tell it again. I'm never going over it again. It was terrible.
There's a smattering of laughter and some groans that maybe didn't quite get the story, or at least don't believe it.
Garrick says as he picks up his pint of ale and takes quite a large gulp, tipping it back for himself, setting it back down on the table with a happy sigh. Such good grog. And then looks over at everybody else and goes, okay, so what other things should I tell to you? What tales of mystery? What tales of horror or adventure? Or perhaps would you like something a little bit more silly? I don't know. There's tons to tell, he says as he pokes a couple of things he's placed on the table in front of him. One of them seems to be some odd skull of some sort that has far too many teeth, and he plays with it as if he's trying to make it talk. A couple of other things look a little odd. A tooth that is far too large. Horns of different animals. A couple of feathers as well. He seems to have just picked up a couple of baubles from everywhere, but he seems far too entertained to tell a story, of whichever one someone picks.
There's a half-orc that speaks up with a bit of a distaste to his tone. Looks like he just got in from one of his own personal adventures or an errand that he's been running. Looks as if he's only here just to see if it's nonsense or not. At which point he says, how about you tell us something that's true for once, then?
Garrick slaps a hand to his chest, gasping in horror. Sir, you impugn my honor. I have only told true. You're welcome to have someone class Zone of Truth if you'd prefer, but I know what I say and I know what I've done.
Uh-huh. So why don't you tell something that you know all of instead of just bits and pieces of? Because there's some things that I can't exactly see you doing with or without a party of your own.
Garrick only grins, leaning forward as he rests his elbows on the table. Oh, you're gonna be fun, he says, far too entertained by the likes of this orc that calls him on apparently his terrible words. Garrick, sitting there, still grinning, a bit of mischief in his eyes, looks at him and goes, have you ever seen a slap fight between minotaurs? I sure have. It was great. In fact, a couple of them killed each other first before we even had to draw our swords.
There's a few more giggles, some poorly hidden snickers. Most of the human audience seems to not want to find this funny, but they can't really hold back to snickering. And there's the briefest glimpse of a smirk to the half-orc's face. So, you saying that you've danced with minotaurs before?
Of course, or I suppose I should better say I watched them have a slap fight of each other's ass. But that's another tale, I suppose. That's just fun, really. Garrick
So,
leans back in his chair, putting his hands behind his head.
so why don't you tell us something that's true? Really,
That was
honest and
true.
true and serious instead of just fooling around. A real story.
Hmm. A real story. Hmm. And what sort of story are you looking for? Are you looking for one of intrigue, of adventure? Or are you looking for one that sounds more like a hero's tale? Because I'll tell you something true right here and now. Most of those heroes' tales you've heard aren't a lick. They're embellished to the point that you'll never know the person behind that heroic name. You'll only know a shadow, a silhouette painted pretty on a background where all else is just a battlefield, but all you see of the hero is black. So tell me, what sort of heroic deed would you hear? A tale of people getting ripped to shreds against a black dragon, or perhaps a struggle against a wyvern rider on a pyramid where none could hit save the ranger or the sorcerer. Are you perhaps more intrigued by the fact that there have been armies slain and slaughtered where they stand? Or are you far more interested in the false tales that are not of worried foes, of worried people keeping everyone alive? Are you just looking for false tales? Ones that will make you feel better, maybe? Because those aren't tales I'll tell you.
A younger woman looking at about in her 20s, maybe early 30s at the very latest, looks up, blue eyes shining with absolute intrigue in what he's saying. So you're saying you know the truth behind those heroes' tales, the ones they've written in the books, between kingdoms, between towns. You say you know them.
Of course I know them. I lived them. But most of those tales in those books are never true anymore. They are written by people that did not come along. And so, those tales are told by others, never by the ones that suffered the most, or by the dead bodies that are left behind.
So what would you have to tell? One of the more interesting ones, like the battle on the pyramid that you mentioned, or about the ranger.
I know very little of the Ranger myself, but I can tell what I have heard of it from around the campfire. It was not a very pretty battle, from what I was told. Apparently, it begins in the mountains, the Sword Mountains, great and glorious as they are. However, within them lie deep caverns, ones the likes of which you have never seen, where great creatures, big and small, have lived and eked out a life, where monsters far larger than I could ever hope to slay live dormant. You have heard of your heroes as they travel through the temples and mires in order to make certain that those that would destroy are brought low. In one such cavern they went, finding traps and trickery upon the way, gaining bruises, scrapes, bleeding upon the way. There is no great enemy here, or so they thought, finding only a few kobolds, and perhaps a few, gnolls. The gnolls were perhaps the easiest of them all. That also didn't match for the tunneling worms. Apparently those are rather gross to be inside. I don't recommend it, especially when, the barbarian doesn't recommend it, but that's another thing. Ah, He looks conflicted for a moment, as if wondering where he should tell it, especially considering this is apparently a tale he's only heard and not witnessed. Apparently, deep deep within those mountains is a cavern the size of a city, holding within it the ruins of such, and a pyramid that stood far taller than I could ever imagine. He seems to consider his words again, his eyes alighting towards the lamplight on the ceiling. There, a rider, astride a great wyvern, took rest upon the side of that pyramid, and beaten and battered by traps, those heroes went to meet him as he wished to fight for one of the cults that would have seen this world destroyed. Garrick thinks for a moment before pulling out the bag and rummaging around in it, pulling a gentle circlet of teeth and bone and setting it gently upon the table as if reverent. They say this belonged to her, to the ranger you speak of, that she took trophies from that great beast, for she was the one to slay it. The druid, the barbarian, they could not. As your tales may tell of 8 heroes, but usually the most wherever in the party was 4, normally 3. He looks over at the crown once again, circlet a crown of terrible teeth and bone. But there are those that stand against incredible odds. And despite all, triumph, despite coming away with wounds that would terrify the greatest of priests. They walk away in order to make certain the world does not fall, that the world of men and women, of peoples great and small, can find shelter behind the shield that they bear.
Silence falls over the tavern. Even the orc shot into a moment of recognition that maybe he misjudged, or perhaps he's being woven into another one of the tales that are spun by someone with such a roughshod reputation all throughout the realm. But even so, there's no words that are spoken. Hush. Every word that could be spoken caught in the back of their throat with a look of, we don't know anything to say. These are stories that are being misled in the books, in the libraries, all across the realm. Who better to hear it from than someone who has lived it, who has heard it from someone who has lived it? And so there is silence, waiting for more about someone who is no longer there.
Garrick looks over his assorted items once again, wondering at them and also a hint of sorrow within his mischievous eyes as he glances over a couple of them. His eyes landing on a tooth, great and terrible. Another landing upon a horn. His thoughts far adrift for a moment before he picks up what looks to be a gem wrapped in cloth. So let me tell you, tales of terror, tales of sorrow, and tales of triumph. But let it be known. He turns the gem over, showing a great crack as if it had been pierced by an arrow. Close to shattering, but not quite. And remember that there are those that will fight those odds, no matter if they have seen such terrors as the world seeming to end within a spot, as destruction fires itself upon the unsuspecting, and knowing that this shall never come to pass again so long as they stand. He sets the gem down once again. To those that are perhaps paying attention, they would recognize it. One of the fabled orbs of destruction, destroyed by a true shot of an arrow. Others, of course, are perhaps the failures of the party, the failures of heroes that finally had to claw their way back up. He looks instead to what looks like a very soggy piece of cloth. When you delve too deep, there are some things you should never touch. But then, of course, you try telling that to a barbarian. He seems far too exasperated whenever he speaks about this. Looking at the soggy cloth that seems to be, inundated with slime. There are some things perhaps better left out of the book, but there are some that should be known. There are failures and triumphs. Some failures worse than others. He sighs.
There's a few moments of giggling once more, perhaps picking up on the exasperation of an adventurer seeing another doing something perhaps less than heroic.
If anyone ever hears the tale of a slime named Gloop, or sorry, I misspoke. A slime named Bloop, please make certain to tell the tale to anyone within the clan of Brahm. I'm certain they'd love to hear it again, considering, well, at least he ended up being bipedal again. Garrick looks far too entertained at the thought, picking up the sodden piece of cloth and waggling it. There are some things that he seems to know a little of, but not entirely, and this is one of them. But he seems entertained by the tale all the same. Within the deep, within the dark, where creatures that would take the mind of you and I reside, be wary never to touch that which glitters and gleam, for you never know if you might lose yourself far more than you'd ever expect. Thus we can learn from a certain barbarian.
There's a few more giggles, a few smatterings of snickers and poorly restrained laughs through mugs held up to faces, trying to perhaps drown the laughs that eventually become coughs, only to calm down once more, focusing in on all the tales and failures and triumphs that are being told by such a simple looking person.
Garrick seems to consider a couple of things within his assortment upon the table, looking again to the crown. I'm certain you have all heard of the temples now picked clean, of the bones left behind. But what of the ones left alive? The smith that created such a treasure. He picks up the crown again, looking over the work with a sort of awe. There are those that society would have been thought lacking in their skill, but I see no such thing, and perhaps a few of them did as well. Despite where they were located, who held their reins and their coin, there are some that you should always respect. The archer of all, figure that, to guide people within a way that led to unexpected. Hmm. You know, they say she knew a lich. That
There's a
they.
gasp here or two that seem disbelieving, mostly in that way that a child hears something out of a storybook that sounds fantastical and something that they would like to be true, but they just can't quite believe it.
Hmm. I only know this because of traveling just with them enough to meet him. They dropped a name, one that you should know, and the lich opened the door. Even did something so fantastical to grant a spell. A wish to save one, but not another, from a terrible fate. His lips purse as he seems to be thinking over it. But then, of course, who do you save? Who do you leave behind? It is a game of sacrifice, after all, to be a hero. What must you leave behind to secure the future? He places the crown down once again, seeming to debate whether he should put it up or not. What good will you see in those that are supposed to be evil? What terror will you see in those that are supposed to be good? Those heroes you speak of so fondly, they were under no crown, no nation, no set of people. The only ones they listened to were the common, the downtrodden. They followed the worries and woes and put themselves in their path, that those behind them may always see the shield for what it was. To stand until the last. Garrick finally picks up the crown and puts it away. Perhaps not trusting current company not to toy with such a treasure.
The half orc speaks again, quieter this time, perhaps in respect, or at the very least, understanding when a story is hitting a bit too close to home. So we haven't heard from one of them. I assume something terrible happened. The one that stories speak of.
And which one do you speak? I know so many.
There's a glance between most of the people that he has audience of, uncertain of if they should even speak the name of someone believed dead, someone who disappeared, according to the history books. But eventually, the young woman from before speaks up. Lysera. What happened to her?
Garrick's eyes zero in on her. A glare that speaks far too much danger within their depths. It's gone within a moment, but the threat is there. That is a name that should not be spoken. The archer you speak of, know that she held those honors highest of all. The shield, he brings a hand up and puts it over one shoulder, where it seems there is an emblem always on her back, that all may hide within the wake of the shield. She would not have disappeared without finishing such a task. But there are some things within this world that even heroes cannot fight. A fate far worse than death. So I ask you now, what know ye of the deck of many things?
There's whispers throughout his audience now at the mention of the deck of many things. Whispers of tales of it by itself, where it could be, about a lich's lair or the keep of a dragon, ancient ruins, nothing quite hitting the mark. And no one quite answers him, too busy entranced with the idea of the deck rather than answering a question from someone who seems to know a little bit more. But eventually they go quiet again out of respect or simply waiting for another story.
There are always tales of the deck, that it hides within a dragon's lair, or perhaps within the clutches of a lich. What if I told you it was much simpler? What if I told you the only thing that needed to be done to find such an artifact was to be kind? Garrick looks over each and every one of the ones that are listening to him, enraptured by his story, but also making certain to drive it home. Not all things that are treasured, not all things that are powerful, are hidden with those of power. Sometimes it finds its hands landed within those of great and terrible strife, the lowest of the low, and those that need the most help. Garrick looks out amongst them, wondering if his words are reaching their ears. What if I told you a simple farmer offered a treasure to draw from a deck that he would not name, for a kindness of keeping an army of orcs from burning down his home? A
There's
kindness
a hush
indeed.
that falls over
Or
the crowd that's like sucking in a breath when you've heard something that is a bit too deep for some people, while others is simply a tale, not something that is dealt with often. In a place like this, far from city-like, but still far from being downtrodden in the dumps, or something as roughshod as simply a farming village. It is a healthy medium. There's not much to worry about near the ocean. It's protected by the city nearby, so it's a harsh breath that is caught in the throats of everyone there, recognizing the situation, but at the same time not being sure if they have any connection to it aside from hearing it from another's mouth.
tell me, what would you do if offered such a fate? To change the face of fate, or to run from it? Would you draw when you know such terrors as a city whose underbelly opened up beneath it, watching as water and fire fight each other in a summoning ritual to the end? Or perhaps You have seen into the eye. The same. He trails off before seeming to snap back to himself. Would you try to change it? Would you leave it to this terror, this unknowing of when the sky might fall down upon you, or the earth would rise up beneath you? Tell me, how many would you draw?
There's silence still. They wouldn't know. It's clear in how they react, how eyes jump from one person to another, waiting for a response, something to keep the story going, but there's no answer. There's only quiet. This time it's nervous, a tension in the air that speaks of different answers based on different people's lives. Some selfish, some altruistic. Hard to gauge if this crowd is more selfish than selfless. But there are definitely answers that are being unspoken, being left to only a story of the deck of many things rather than answering something that they have no real judgment to say about.
Garrick takes his time to look at each and every one, before finally locking his eyes on a sweeping gesture across the room one last time. Then learn this and learn this well. Of three, only one walked away. And that one went to a lich to ask for a wish. One was returned, the other left behind. And this is perhaps where I begin. But this is a truth that you should know more than ever. Those that drew knew what they were doing. And it was the chance to change fate that moved their hand. So, tell me here, with time racing, would you be able to make such a call? Or who indeed would you be able to leave behind to continue striding forward? There is no end to the tale of the one that you speak, for none of us know it. But death is not that end. Garrick settles back in his chair, solemn and quiet, serious, with a slight glare in his eyes. His stories having taken on a more serious tone than he would have preferred, perhaps, as the scars of his adventurers show in his eyes, and far more jovial tone seems to be him wanting to remember the good times instead of the bad. His hands lace before him as he considers the trinkets upon the table again.